All right. So this is the Coding from Scratch lecture week 1. We'll cover HTML and CSS. Since it's just you in here, feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. I'll just do a regular structured lecture, but if you have any questions or you want to focus on something more, go ahead and let me know, okay?
Awesome. Do you usually have, do people usually share their video screens with you or just listening?
We can share a video screen if you have a question. Since you're the only one, I do open the floor up for questions. Usually that's done in office hours, but feel free if you have any questions.
Sure. And let's see. Are you getting my, just because it's the first time I've used Zoom before, I just want to make sure I'm doing this right. Are you getting video feed of me that's a black screen?
I see a black screen, yeah.
Okay, and now you're seeing nothing?
And now I see a photo of you.
Okay, great. So I was just curious, when people do this in the class, based on your experience, are you usually looking at a bunch of photos of people? Or are you looking at a bunch of videos of people on your end? What are you used to seeing? Just because
usually it's like a video feed, kind of similar to what you're seeing of me.
Yeah.
That way I can see my students' faces and such.
Great.
But yeah.
Okay, well, I'll work on that then. I just got my wisdom teeth taken out a couple days ago, so I'm like all like patched up at the moment, but I'll do that in the future.
No worries. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. All right, so this is Coding from Scratch, HTML, and CFS. Before you begin programming, what you need to program first is your mind and how you think, and you want to start thinking like a programmer. What that means is being very good at precisely saying what we want the computer to do. Since we're talking to computers and not human beings, there are things that computers aren't capable of. You can't understand intent, you can't add content, and they can't ask for clarification. So when I'm speaking to you and you don't understand what I'm saying, you can ask me for clarification, or you can add context to it based off of my surroundings or where I came from or the subject matter that we're talking about, or you can understand the intent that I'm trying to give. But computers don't understand that. They're incapable. So you have to be very precise and very specific and very detailed on the things that you tell a computer to do, because it's going to follow the instructions exactly how you have them. So for example, if I told you to make a bowl of cereal, how would you tell me to make a bowl of cereal?
Interesting. So let's make a bowl of cereal. If I had to tell you to do it, then I guess I'd have to tell you what materials to make the bowl with, and then yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so you know, if we were talking to another human being, I'd be like, hey, grab a bowl, grab some cereal, pour the cereal into the bowl, grab some milk, pour that, and you kind of have the idea. But if you're talking to a computer, you have to say something. Grab the bowl from the pantry on the second shelf with your right hand. Place the bowl on top of the counter. Grab the box of cereal from the pantry. Place the cereal on the counter. Open the cereal box. Pour the cereal into the bowl at a 45-degree angle. Stop when it's 3/4 full. Things of that nature. It's very specific, very detailed. Things we don't kind of think of. We kind of just, as humans, have intuition. So we kind of get the idea of when people are talking to us, but a computer won't. So if you say pour cereal or pour milk, first you have to define what pour even means, and you have to specify a stopping point and a starting point. So that's kind of how you want to start thinking once you start solving these problems, is just being very detailed, very specific. Are there any steps that I'm missing? If I were a computer, if I was a very literal person, would this complete my task?
Mm-hmm. Great.
So when you're thinking like a programmer, some questions you want to ask yourself is, what do I have to work with and what steps are needed to accomplish your goal? I like to break it down into 3 questions. What do I know? What do I need to know? And what do I need to do? And when you kind of break it down like that, the code writes for itself. So you know what information you have, you know what you need, and then from that, you can kind of figure out how you can connect the two.
Gotcha.
So a lot of the times, you'll see a lot of developers with a whiteboard right next to them, and that's because they're writing pseudocode, fake code, just kind of like outlining an essay, right? You're like, okay, I need to do this, and these are the points I need to hit. So you want to do the same thing with programming. So before you even start writing any code or solving any problems, write it out by hand first, draft it out and see if it makes sense, and then go to the code. That's a lot of things that beginners forget to do. They just jump straight into the code and try to solve the problem all at once. And it can become very overwhelming, and you're still trying to learn, so you'll forget things and then you become frustrated. But if you write it out first by hand and answer those 3 questions, what do I know, what do I need to know, and what do I need to do, then it'll be a little bit easier for you when it's actually time to write the code. So if I want the average of $1 bills in a wallet, let's imagine a wallet with a lot of cash, and some of those bills are $1 bills, and I want the average of $1 bills in the wallet. If we break it down into those 3 questions, what do I know? So from this information we have here, what do we know?
That we have a wallet, that we have at least $1 bill in there, but we have more bills than that.
Okay. Yeah. So we know that we're looking for $1 bills. So we know that we have to look for the $1 bill. We also know how to calculate average, right?
Say again?
We want that. Is to calculate average.
Okay.
We know kind of how to figure out how to calculate average, right? The total number of $1 bills divided by the total number of bills, right? So with that, we know that we need to know the total number of $1 bills and the total number of bills in the wallet. So we're starting to break it down. So what do I need to do in order to fill in these blanks? Well, I need to count all the bills in the wallet. Okay? And as I'm counting them, I need to check if any of these are $1 bills. And if they are, I need something to keep track of that, so that when I come to the average, I have the numbers I need in order to calculate. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, it's deep. It's definitely deep, but I get the premise of it. And just slowly but surely, I can tell that I'm going to be kind of retraining the way that I'm viewing things. But right. I have a bit of a background in agency life, like building designs of the front end of websites. So I've never done coding, but I've worked at an agency for 3+ years building websites on the front end. So I can speak lingo that a lot of people can't. And so it's changing my perspective, because I'm going totally from, I'm going totally left brain, obviously, in a new language, but it is making sense.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so you kind of just, and it's going to take some time and practice, of course, to redevelop your brain like that, because as humans, we naturally make a lot of assumptions of knowledge, but you can't do that with a computer. Not at all. Computer doesn't know anything. The only reason why a computer seems smart is because of programming. So it's going to be very literal and very direct. So you need to break down those problems into tiny little problems, because of the scope of things, it will be a bigger problem. But if you break it down into the smaller ones, just like counting total number of bills, then it'll be easier to attack.
That's great.
All right, so then let's go ahead and jump into creating a project. So when you're creating a brand new project for an application or a website, you have your main project folder. This is considered the root directory, home directory, project directory. You'll hear it a bunch of times, either a folder or a directory, either way, where your project lives. Inside of that folder is where you're going to have all the files that you need in order to build that application or website. So that's going to include your HTML files, your CSS files, JavaScript files, and as the course goes along, many other files after that. But for the purpose of this lecture, we're just going to be focusing on the HTML and CSS files. But all of them have to be in that project folder in order for the application to work.
Yes.
So let's see what that looks like. So if I go here, and I am on my desktop, and I'm going to create a new project. I'm just going to create a new folder, and let's say I call it CFS lecture, and what is today? Is it the 23rd? The 23rd, 123. So now I have my project folder, and then I can go ahead and I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. For CFS, coding from scratch, you're going to be working in browser, but if you want to be working in a text editor, I highly recommend Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to drag this folder into this program here, and here we see my folder. Currently, there's not any files in there, so I'm going to go ahead and add my HTML file. So I'm just going to click this plus icon. Can you guys see it, or is the face blocking it?
I can see it.
Okay.
Let's see. Well, yeah.
Okay. So then I'm going to type in index.html, and there I have my HTML file. I'm going to go ahead and add my CFS file as well. We're not going to touch it yet, but just so that we have it in there. So now my folder contains two files, index.html and style.css. So that's how you're going to want to initially set up your project. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into HTML so we can, put something on the screen.
Great.
What is HTML? It is a hypertext markup language. Essentially what it is, it allows more than text to sit on the page. You can have tables, you can have images, you can have links, lists, you can have all sorts of things. It's the skeleton of any website site. With that, there are different tags and elements that you use in order to make that skeleton. So a tag is a specialized series of characters that a browser interprets as either the start or end of an HTML file. So essentially, if we look at this example down here with the P tag, in the red, that is the syntax for the tag. So here, without the / is going to be your opening tag or start tag or beginning tag. And that's saying, hey, this is the beginning of a paragraph element. Here with the / this is saying this is the end of the paragraph element. So almost, I would say 95% of all HTML elements have an opening and closing tag. So you want to make sure every time you open a tag, you are closing it. Now there are a handful selected that are self-closing and they don't have this closing tag, but we'll go over those. An element is an HTML component that contains the start and end tag. You can think of them as a whole object. So if we're looking at this example down here, this is the paragraph element. So the stuff that is in between the tag, the text that's in between the tags is what actually appears on the browser. So this is kind of just like a markup language telling it, hey, I want it to be a paragraph. And then you write the text in between the tags, and then this would be considered the entire paragraph element. So with HTML, there's a specific document structure that every single file is comprised of. It has the doc type, HTML element, head element, and body element. Doc type is going to be at the very beginning of your document, and it specifies which version of HTML is being used. The HTML element denotes the start of the entire HTML document. It contains all of the code of HTML in between that opening and closing tag of the HTML element. Inside of the HTML element, we have the head element and the body element. The head element is at the top, and it contains metadata. Metadata is data that is not displayed. So that could be viewport, it could be for search engine optimization, it could be for all sorts of things. It also contains links to other files. So later on in the lecture, we're going to link our CSS file inside of the head element. It also contains the title of the document. The body element, which is beneath the head element, is where you're going to be spending the majority of your time. This is all the content that's actually displayed in the browser. So let's go ahead and check that out. So if I am my HTML file here, a cool thing about Visual Studio Code is I can just type in HTML Please type that. I'll choose HTML5 because that's the version we're going to be using. I hit enter, and then I have my entire document structure written out for me. Here we have our doc type, and then we have our HTML element. So we can see that everything is within this opening and closing HTML tag. Inside of that, we have our head and our body. The head contains the metadata and the title, and later on it will include a link to the CFS file. For now, I'm going to change my title to CFS lecture. And then we'll have our body here, which is where we're going to be spending the majority of our time because this is where the content is laid on the ground. Are there any questions on the document structure?
Not this time.
Okay. All right. So that is the structure of every document. So with that, there are structure elements. Structural elements are kind of like outlining your page. It is structuring your document. So you have the div element, which is probably the most frequently used. It's used to create a generic container for content. What that means essentially is just like, imagine an imaginary box, and with that there's content inside of that. So you have different boxes to divide the different parts of your page, or maybe inside of a section, you have different parts to that section and you need to divide it. So you can just kind of think of it as a divider, and that's why it's called div. Section provides a structure around the block of content grouping in a logical format. Technically, section and div do the exact same thing. Section is just, you know, it just makes more sense logically when we're speaking in the English language. Like, this is the about me section. This is the background section. This is the contact section. They technically do the same thing, but it was introduced later on in HTML5, I believe. And that way you can group your document in a more logical format. Then we have the header. So the header is brand new to HTML5. It's used to mark the header part of the body. There is only one per document. Essentially, a header is just like in a Word document, you have a header and a footer. The same thing here, except now we're dealing with the web browser. So in the header, what you normally find within that is our next element, the nav, which is navigation. And that's used to mark up the navigation area. So that's how you navigate from different pages to the website. So if we are looking at a website, let's say Starbucks. This green and white area at the top would be considered the header. And this right here is the navigation. It allows me to navigate to different parts of this website. The counterpart to the header is the footer, and that outlines the footer content in the document. So this is where you're gonna find like social media links, about us, the career center, how to contact us, customer service, things like that. So if we are looking at this Starbucks page, we can see this footer, right? We have our social media, join our email list, about us, career center, all of these things. This is the footer, and it is the counterpart of the header. If we kind of dissect this website, we can see that there are different sections, right? So that's maybe where you want to use the different section tabs. Here, we could see that this is one section, but it has different parts. We're advertising the blonde espresso and also the Guatemalan casi cielo. So here, you might want to use a div for this area and this area, but it all falls into one section. And everything that you're seeing on the page is within the body tag.
Cassandra.
Yes.
I did have a question. If you were to inspect element on that page, would you find section elements there, or divs, do you think, in that area?
Yeah, most likely around this area where you can kind of see the background color change, definitely. So if we were to inspect, we could, oh, it doesn't give me page source yet.
Div.
see we have these different divs right here. And then if you highlight the code, it actually highlights the div in the browser.
Correct.
So you can see, and here's the section, and there's the div, and things of that nature.
Okay,
so
section.
if you ever want to like dissect a page and see how they did it, you can just always inspect it and look at the code. Any other questions on structural elements?
Nope.
All right. All right, so let's go ahead and add some structure.
I know there's other people in here. I know there's other people in here. I said, I know there's other people in here, but I'm the only one talking. I think both Russells made it, which is amazing. What's up, Russ?
Yeah,
right.
For those of you who joined us later, feel free to jump in and ask any questions or stop me if you're not clear about what I'm saying. All right, so let's go ahead and add some structural elements. So let's go ahead and add our header. And what goes inside of a header normally?
Who knows?
Navigation.
Ah, okay, yeah.
All right, so we have our header and then we have our navigation in there. And then let's see, let's make a footer. So we have a counterpart there. And in the middle, I'm just gonna make 3 sections. All right, so we have 3 sections, and then just for fun, let's put a div inside of all of them. All right, so now we're starting to outline our document. I have a header, I have a navigation inside of my header, I have 3 sections, each with some divs inside, and then lastly, I have my footer. So now I'm kind of getting more structure here. So inside of these sections, let me go ahead and say, so those are my multiple personalities, I guess. And then a little bit of history, and let's do another section. Yep. All right, so now I have 3 sections. So let's go ahead and talk about element attributes. Element attributes communicate specific functionality about a tag. There are 2 uses for element attributes. They're used to change and modify a tag's functionality, and they add functionality that isn't automatic. Essentially, some elements, not all of them, well, all of them technically could have an attribute. But essentially what they do is they add different functionality to these elements. So a couple examples of elements of tags that have attributes is an image tag. So an image tag has the source attribute. Essentially what that is saying is, where is the source of this file that is this image? And then that will produce the image on the actual browser. So with that, they can have 2 types of sources. You can have a relative URL or you can have an absolute URL. A relative URL is relative to the position according to the project folder. So an example is, if I'm in someone's house and I ask where the bathroom is, and I say down the hall to the right, go down the hall to the right, I'm in the bathroom. If you place me in another place, so another person's house or another building, the bathroom may not be down the hall and to the right, because that was only relative to that first house I was in. So this is relative to the project folder. So if you have an image that is directly in your project folder, then you would just put the name of the file. Now, if you have an image inside of a folder that's inside of your project folder, then you would say, okay, go to this folder, and then inside of this folder, there is this file. That is a relative URL. An absolute URL is something that's not going to change. So that's something that exists online. So if I were to steal an image from online, I can just right-click and copy image address, and that is the absolute URL of that image. Now, I highly recommend that if you're going to use images, just go ahead and download them and put it in your project folder, because websites can change, they can go down, things can happen, and maybe that absolute URL is no longer available, and now you have a broken image on your website. The next one we're going to talk about is an anchor tag. Anchor tags are used to link things together. So you can use an anchor tag in navigation to link to other pages on the site, or you can use an anchor tag to link an image or text to an outside source, like maybe your social media page, a LinkedIn page. With the anchor tag, inside of the opening tag, you'll have a couple of attributes. One is going to be href, which works the exact same way as source. So we can have an absolute or a relative URL. And then you have target. So let's say you are clicking on something, and normally it redirects that page to wherever the href you have set it to. So let's say you wanted to open it in a separate tab and you don't want them to lose the page that they're on currently, then you can set target equal to underscore blank, and that will open it in a separate tab. And I'll show you an example of how to do that. Next, we have our input tags. Input tags have quite a few attributes that you can use. One of them is a placeholder. So for example, when you're filling out a form and it asks for your email, and then in that little box where you type in the email, it'll have example john@gmail.com. Then that is considered a placeholder. It's holding place of the text that you're going to be writing. Then we have button on click. So this is where we're adding functionality that isn't automatically associated. Essentially, on click is an attribute that works with JavaScript. So whatever you set on click equal to, it's going to be the name of the function in your JavaScript file. So let's say when you click on a button, you want something to appear on the page. Maybe someone signs up for an email subscription, and then because of that, you give them a coupon code. But you don't want that coupon code to appear unless they hit that submit button. That's when you can use onClick, and then it will connect to your JavaScript, and then that coupon code will appear. So let's go ahead and add some elements with attributes. I'm going to start the page here. All right. So here we have our code. So let's go ahead and let's start off with the image here. So meet Cassandra, I'm going to put it inside of this div. I'm going to have my image tag. Something I didn't mention earlier, an image tag is self-closing. So it does not require that closing tag. So I'm going to put my source, location, and then I'm going to close it out. So remember, we can do this two ways. We can do an absolute or a relative URL. I'm going to go ahead and show both. Let me add a comment here. That way, in case you guys want a copy of the code, you can just message me afterwards. Okay. So absolute URL, let's go ahead and let's go to the web. Let me bring that Starbucks page back here. All right, and I'm just going to use my GitHub. And I could just right click the image, copy image address, go back to my code, and then we have an absolute URL. Now, if I wanted to use a relative URL, I could just take an image from my computer, say this one, and I'm going to put it in my project folder, which is here. So now that appears here, and since it's directly in the folder, I can just put the file name. So I'll just put JPEG, and then that is an example of a relative URL. Okay. Now let's go ahead and use our anchor tags. Let's say this is a multi-page website, so I'm going to go ahead and create a couple pages, do contact, and do a portfolio. Go back here. And now I'm going to use an anchor tag. So we'll have an opening and closing. I'm going to have 3 of these because I want to navigate between my home page, portfolio page, and contact page. And then let me just add some content to these HTML pages. Nothing fancy. All right, so in my anchor tag, we use the href attribute. So I'm going to set these up with hrefs. And you don't have to code like I do. I just like to have everything set up so I make sure that everything's closed and I don't forget a step. So in my href, since we are going to be navigating to other pages of the site, I'm going to use a relative URL. So the first one I'm going to do is my index.html because I'm going to consider that my home page. And in between my opening and closing tabs, I'm going to write the word home. And that word is now going to be clickable and take me to my index.html. Next, I want to go to my portfolio. So I'll just go ahead and put portfolio.html since it's directly in that folder. And I'll put portfolio here because that's the word I want to appear. And then we'll do one for contact. And we'll write contact.
Cassandra, can you remind me what href stands for?
I don't know what it's, I think it's hyperlink reference is what it stands for. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. But it works as the same as source. So essentially it's just saying, where is the location of this? What are we referencing?
Okay.
So there we have our anchor tags for with our relative URL. So I'll put relative URL to navigate to different pages. Put our comment there. And then let's add some anchor tags in our footer to connect our social media. I'll just use my GitHub since it's right there. href and steal that. Ooh. Okay. And then when they click on my social media, I don't want it to redirect to that page. I want it to open in a separate tab. So I'm going to use the target attribute, and I'll set that equal to _blank. Close that. And then instead of writing GitHub, I don't want it to be text. I want it to be an icon. So I'm going to go ahead and download an icon so that icon can be clickable. I like to use the website Icon Finder. There are many out there, but this is just my favorite. And then I'll type in GitHub. Oh, all right. I guess we have to use another one here. Just steal one of these. To be transparent. Size. And it should be right here. And I am going to save this image. I'll call it GitHub. I'll go back to my desktop and move this image to my project folder. And now, instead of putting text in between my anchor tag, I'm going to nest another element, and that's going to be the image. So I'll use an image here, and we have a relative URL, and it is github.png. Close that. So now an icon should appear on my footer, the GitHub icon, which will take me to my GitHub page. Okay, so now if we save all of that and we open this in a browser, we can see that. So let's go ahead and open this. So I'm just going to click on my index.html. So here we have our page. Okay, we have our navigation. That takes us to the different pages. Now, if you notice, I can't click on any navigation here. I'd have to hit that. So I probably want to add navigation to all of my files. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that here. So now if I refresh this, I should be able to navigate between all of my pages. Okay. Then we have the image using the absolute URL, and then we have the relative. This image is very large, but we can use CFS to modify that. Then we have a little bit of history and skills, and then it looks like our footer didn't make it, so let's see what's going on there. Let's see. Oh, I use href instead of source for image. Go. Save that. And there it is. Now we can click on this, and now that will take me to my get page. Okay, so now we have some elements on the page, and we can navigate, and we can go to different sites. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and take this giant image, comment this out. So we're only dealing with one image. And those are elements with attributes. Just a handful of them, not all of them, of course. But are there any questions on this so far?
How did you comment that out?
I highlight it, and then you hit, if you're on a Mac, you hit Command // If you're on a PC, it's Control // You can go for commenting down on comments.
And you're using Visual Studio Code. Now, you mentioned a program that we're going to be using in this course. I didn't understand the words you said. Could you spell the name of that program?
In the course, you're going to be working inside of the browser. So there's like built-in windows where you can type code in for coding from scratch. Once coding from scratch is completed, then when you get into front-end foundations, which is the next course in the program, then you're going to download Visual Studio Code. I recommend just downloading it from the get-go and start coding in it so you can get used to it, and then just copying that code when you need to submit your project inside of the browser.
Great.
Visual Studio Code is super cool. You can download a bunch of plugins that will help you with your coding, make your life a lot easier. Yeah.
Cool.
Cassandra,
is there another question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I noticed that you're using a Mac. I also have a Mac. Is there, but I'm in the school for Java. So do you recommend switching to PC, or is there?
No, you can definitely code on a Mac with Java. There's no problem. Because nowadays, since there's, Apple kind of took over, everything is Mac friendly.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll be fine. You can download a clip for Mac.
Okay, and you said this program is called Visual Studio?
Yes, Visual Studio Code. So okay. I believe the site to it is code.visual Studio. And then it's multi-platform. So if you have Linux, Windows, or Mac, you can go ahead and download it.
Cool, thank you.
No problem. I thought I heard a beginning of another question. Is there another question? Okay, we'll keep going. All right, so those are elements with attributes. The next thing I want to talk about are semantic elements. This is kind of like the styling portion of HTML, not really, because styling comes from CSS. but this is where heading tags are introduced. Heading tags are numbered 1 through 6, 1 being the most important, 6 being the least as important. But still important because it's still a heading. So just like the articles in the newspaper, you have different size headings. You know, your front article is going to have that big heading. It's going to grab the audience. Those are going to be your like heading 1 tags. And then you have your smaller headings, H2, H3, 4, 5, 6. One of the things that Google does in its algorithm when doing searches, and it's just a really tiny aspect of the giant algorithm, is it checks to see what's in these heading tags. So for example, if you're selling bicycles, you definitely want to have the word bicycle in the heading 1 tag because it's an important word and it's related to your site. So those are kind of things you want to keep in mind. It's things that are important. That comes with CSS as well as like design, the study of design and things like that, how the mind works, how it visually interprets things. So this is where it kind of comes important. Then we have italicized. You'll see EM and you'll see I. They both visually are just like italicized. EM is treated as important. So this is emphasized. To do a bold, you'll use the strong tag. You can also bold through CFS, but that's more styling. If you're doing styling through HTML, it's kind of telling the computer like, hey, this is important. This is emphasized. And then we have ordered list and unordered list. An ordered list is going to be a simple numbered list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. And then unordered list is just going to be bullet points. They are written the exact same way. The only difference is an O and a U. O for the numbers, U for the bullet points. So let's go ahead and add some semantic elements to our code so you can see what that looks like. So I'm going to have all of these be H1 tags where I have my little sections here. So we have some H1 tags. Let's see, under my photo, let's go have a paragraph tag, some text about me. I'm just going to steal some dummy text. Lorem ipsum. So lorem ipsum is this big Latin text that developers steal from for dummy text. There's also a lot of fun ones out there, like cat ipsum, if you're a cat person, bacon ipsum, hipster ipsum, you know, just to make your life a little bit more amusing. So there we go. I'm going to wrap this text so I don't have to slide over. So we have some paragraphs there. Let's see. Let's put a paragraph here. Paragraph. And then my skills section, let's go ahead and make an ordered list. So with the ordered list, you're going to have an open and closing OL, saying this is the beginning and closing of the ordered list. And then inside of that, you're going to have your list items. So these are the numbered items. So let's say problem solving, HTML, so there we have some. And then just so you can see the emphasized and the bold, we'll go ahead and bold some text. So here, I'll just add a strong tag, and I will put the closing right here. So all of this text is going to be bolded. And then let's kind of do the same here for italicized. I'm just going to pick some text to be italicized. All right, so we can go ahead and save that, and now we can go back to our page, and we can see the difference here. So we see our H1 tags. Now these are headings, and you see that they got a little bit bigger and they're more bolded. Then we have our paragraph element. This one we decided to bold the sentences, and here we decided to italicize them. And then we have our ordered list, where you could see 1, 2, 3. Now, if I wanted to make this an unordered list, all I would have to do is change that O to a U. So I can do that and save it.
I'll take the Gideon statement and roll it.
And now it is bullet point. Was there a question?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so are there any questions on semantic elements before I jump into tables and forms? Pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into it then. So tables and forms, this is where things kind of get a little bit trickier. So a table is essentially like an Excel spreadsheet, right? You have your rows, you have your columns, you fill in information, and then you have a nice little table. Same thing you can do with HTML. You have to format it. There's a lot of nesting of elements, and I'll show you how. And then forms is a valuable way to gather information. So you can have a form, a sign-up form, maybe a billing address form with someone purchasing something. Basically, you're just gathering information and then you're using that information for something else. So let's go ahead and add a table and a form. So let's say I'm going to have another div here. And I'm going to put in H2 element. And I'm going to say educational background. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a table. So when you're making a table, the first element you want to start off with is the table element. And say this is the beginning of my table. And then you'll have T head, and that's kind of like the header. Then you have T body, that's the body. And then you also have T foot, which is like the footer. I'm not going to use T foot because I don't really use it. You'll see tables in different forms and formats because the T head, T body, and T foot are fairly new. So there are some developers that still use just regular table and then just make rows and columns. But you can also specify, like if you want to target the head or styling and you want it to be a certain color, it makes it a little bit easier. So in the head, I'm going to first make a row. So the way that we make a new row is a TR element. And then what makes our columns is what we put our data is going to be TD. Okay? So the number of TD inside of the TR tells us how many columns are in that row. Okay? So let's say I want to do, say school, say location, and then let's do major. That's not invalid. Okay, so there we have our header, school, location, major. And now inside of my body, I'm going to put some data in there. So I'm going to make a new row. And in that row, I'm going to fill out the columns. So school, we can do UT Austin. And we have location, Texas. And major, engineering. And then we'll make another row. Twitter camp. There So now we have a table, and in that table we have a header and we have a body. The header has 1 row with 3 columns, and then our body has 2 rows filling out those 3 columns. So as you can see here, it can get pretty lengthy writing a table. And that's where things can get a little bit messy and complicated, because you want to make sure that everything lines up so it's easier to read, and you make sure that you're closing everything properly. So my tables line up here, my T heads line up here, my bodies line up here, my rows are lining up, and my data is lining up. So it really helps with indenting to make sure you're not making any mistakes. So there we have our tables. Any questions on tables before I jump into forms?
I'm curious what that looks like.
Okay, you can go ahead and see it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not anything pretty or fancy by any means, but that's when CFS comes into play.
Got it.
All right, so there we have our table, and now in our footer, let's say I'll do a contact me. So let's do H3 so you can just see it. And then for a form, we're going to use the form tag. And in my form, I'm going to have some inputs. Input is also another self-closing tag. Okay. And then inside this input, I'm going to have some attributes. So I'm going to say the type. So the type here is going to be text. And I'm going to have a placeholder for it. And I'll say, enter your name. And then I'll have another input, say type. We'll do email. So when I say type email, it's going to make sure that whatever the user types in is a valid email. So it's in a valid email format. And I'll do placeholder. And then we'll do another input type. We'll just do text. And we can do enter your message. Okay. So there we have our input. So if we go back here, we can see that. I don't like the way that looks. I want it to have some labels, and I want these to be kind of spaced out. So I'm going to go ahead and add a label tag. And I'm going to say, enter your name. I'll just say full name, actually. And then I'm going to put my closing label tag outside of my input. Make sure my input's nested. And then I'm going to put in a break tag. So what that's going to do, that's just going to, it's essentially like hitting enter. It's going to create a new line. Then I'll do one for over here. And we'll do email. Okay, and then we'll do one over here. And then lastly, I'm going to have another input tag that is going to be my submit button. So I'm going to say type equals submit. And then value is going to equal submit. And what value does is just like what the button shows, the text that shows up on the button. So I'm going to save that.
So I have a question on that one. The value there, you said submit on both of them? Why wouldn't the value on that one be button? Or the type be button and the value be submit?
So the type is considered submit because in the form there are 2 attributes here called action and method. which are normally equal to PHP files. So basically what that does, that type submit, once you click that, it tells the form, send this information, and when you do action, it says send this information to whatever file this is equal to, and then method, whatever this file is equal to, tells it what to do with that information.
Got it.
So it needs to know that it is a type submit, because otherwise a button is just a button. It's just like a facade of a button. It doesn't actually do anything unless you put functionality to it. So this is telling it this is a submit type. So we're actually grabbing this information and we're putting it somewhere.
Yes. Great.
Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Okay, perfect. All right, and then if we refresh that, there we have our little contact here. So we can enter some text. And, okay. All right, so that is a form. That's all I have for you on HTML. Before I jump into CSS, now this is a very broad overview on HTML. If you have any HTML questions, you're working through the curriculum, this is the time to ask it before I jump into CSS. So I will open up the floor to any questions.
It's tough to
other two questions I haven't heard from. You guys have any questions? Not to cut you off.
No, it's all good.
All good? Okay. Everyone feeling super great about HTML? No questions, no concerns?
Sure. I think my honest response, though, is that, you hear it all, but you're like, all right, when I'm on my own, staring at the screen and have to do something, how will it all come back to me? Part of me is wondering how much you're controlling that Visual Studio, like how much you're doing in the background on the keyboard that we're not seeing. Like that's what my mind's wondering right now. Like, are you doing indentations every single time to be able to tab over, or is it automatically doing that for you?
It's automatically tabbing over for me. So you can set your tab right on Visual Studio. So mine's set to 2, but you can do it 4 if you want it more exaggerated. I am pretty nifty on the keyboard, so there are probably a lot of things. If I'm moving too fast, let me know. I try to slow it down. But yeah, there's a lot of tricks on the keyboard that I'm doing to make it a little bit faster since we only have such a small amount of time.
Sure.
If once you're working on the curriculum, if you have any questions, I do have office hours today from 1 to 2 Mountain Standard Time. So that's 3 to 4 Eastern Time, 2 to 3 Central Time, and 12 to 1 Pacific Time. If you're outside of any of those time zones, I'm sorry, you have to do the math as much as I can do right now. But once you start working through that, go ahead and join me for office hours if you have any questions. But if there are no more questions on HTML, we'll go ahead and jump into CSS.
Great.
All right, let's go ahead and do it. All right, CSS. What is CSS? It is a cascading style sheet. Don't bother reading all of that text. Essentially what cascading style sheet, it is a way to style the HTML on our page. So as we can see our HTML right now, it's pretty dull, it's pretty boring. Nothing too fun is happening here. CSS is what adds all that fun styling. So we can have a page like the Starbucks page where it's all nice and visually friendly. And we can, have different backgrounds, different fonts, different font colors. We can make things hover and do things there. So that's where CSS comes into play. It's called cascading because essentially if I apply a style to a specific element, any element inside of that other element that's nested is going to be styled the same way. So just like you inherit genes from your parents, it's like inheriting dark hair from my parents, that's cascading style. Now I can override that and I could dye my hair and I could become a redhead. And that's when we use different selectors to change those specific elements. And that's where classes and IDs come into play. So for example, if I style my body, everything inside of the body tag, inside the opening and closing body tags, is going to have that same styling. So that means all of our documents, right? Because everything that we write is inside of our body. If I write in the header, all of the nav is effective. If I write in this specific section, all of this is affected, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's called cascading. So the first thing you want to do before you write any CSS code is you actually want to link your CSS file to your HTML file so that the CSS code that you write actually appears. So we have written a file, we created a file, style.css, we have it made already. And now we're going to go back to our head element and put our link tag. So I'm going to link my CSS file. And then we're going to have a couple of attributes. The first one is going to be rel, which stands for relation. What is the relation here? The relation is that it is a style sheet. Then we're going to have type. It is a text file and it's CSS. And then we are going to have href. Where does this file exist? So this is going to be a relative URL in this situation. So we're just going to put the file name, style.css, since it is directly inside of my project folder. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So now my CSS file is now officially linked to my HTML file. Now, something I want to point out is that it's only linked to my index.html. Had I built out these full pages here, I would have to link them here as well if I wanted the styling to appear on these pages as well. Now, if you want different styling for different pages, not sure why you would exactly want to do that, but if you do, you can use different CSS files for the different HTML files. But normally, you would just have the one and connect all of them to that. Any questions on linking the CSS file?
So you don't need a close tag for the link?
No, the link is self-closing as well. All right. So with CSS, there is a specific syntax. You'll have your selector, then you'll have curly brackets, and then you'll have your properties, and then your value, and then they're separated by a semicolon. You can have one property in there, you could have 20, you could have 40, you can have as many errors as you need. So a selector can be a number of things. It can be the actual element name, a class, or an ID. I'm first going to show you the element name. So if I grab, let's say we do the body. So with the body, I'm going to put the element name, then my curly bracket. So in this case, the body is considered the selector. And then in that, I'm going to have my property. So one property can do is background color, and I can put a color in there. There are some default colors for like blue you can choose, and then you can see it's just like bright blue, but you can adjust it. Let's say I want a specific shade, say here, then it will do the RGB. You can also do a hexadecimal color. So one site I like to use is color.adobe. And let's see, let's say I like this blue here. Then I can just grab the hex number here, which is just a series of numbers and letters. And then instead of RGB, I'll choose the pound, the hex color. Okay. So you can do it in a number of ways. If you use the words, you are limited to the actual shade. So if you're very specific, I would go ahead and use either RGB or the hex color. So if we put that, and then let's say I wanted to change the font color, so I'll just put color, let's change font, white, and I save that. We go back here, that changed it. Okay, So since we targeted the body, we can tell that everything is styled that way. Now let's say I wanted to target the strong, right? The bolded. I can target strong, and I can say color, let's say red. Just so we can see. You see the red is here, and it is for that strong element. You can do the same thing for any of these other elements. Okay? So that is using an element as a selector. Some basic properties that you'll be using, and this is by far not anywhere near all of them. There's a million out there. Color, you're going to change the font color, which we already saw. Background color, change the background color. Font family, that's going to say what type of font that is. So that's Times New Roman, Georgia, Comic Sans, whatever font you like. Font weight is going to be the thickness of the font. And then you have border style. So that could be dashed, that could be solid, that could be dotted. So for example, if I wanted to add a border style to my table, I could do table, border style, let's say dashed. Save that. We come back here, we can see that it is dashed. Okay. In the time that we have, there's no way I can cover all of the properties that exist out there, but a really great course for that is W3 Schools. I still use it to this day. I've been coding for a long time. And if you go to CFS, you can see all the different elements that you probably would be dealing with. So let's say you wanted to focus on background, so you wanted to do an image, you can find the syntax for that. So here, an example of using an image. And then it also tells you all the different values that they could equal to and what these different properties do. So background position, for example, is one, and then it has the default values. And it gives you a lot of information of what browsers support this and things of that nature. So you can have all those things in mind. And here you can see the different types of values that you put into that one property. So as you can see, for this one property, we have, let's say, I'm going to estimate 12. I'm not going to even count that. So you can see that there's an infinite number of combinations that you can do when you are doing CSS. CSS is kind of the artistic side of development. So a lot of developers don't like it. Some developers love it. It's really where it allows you to explore the artistic side of things and design styles. So we went ahead and added some properties. So let's talk about the different selectors. So we already talked about the element being a selector, but you can also use a class and an ID as a selector as well. Classes uses the period syntax, and I'll show you what that means, while IDs use the pound, number sign, hashtag, whatever you want to call it, syntax. Classes are reusable. So you can reuse a class as many as you want, as many times as you want. So you can use it on H1 element, you can use it on a paragraph element, you can use it on a div. You can use the classes as many times as you want. IDs are unique. You can only use them once. And that's really important when you get into JavaScript and you're starting to grab elements by their ID. If you have multiple elements with the same ID, your JavaScript's gonna freak out and not know which one to grab. So IDs only are used once. Classes are reusable. So for example, let's say every other div, every other section, I want to have a different background. So the first section, let's say I'm going to add a class here. So what you do is in your opening tag, you write class, and you set that equal to the name of the class. So I'll just call it light. And then I want every other one to be like that. So we'll do this one, not this one, this one. And then we'll save that. And then here, When we target that, we write period because it's a class, and then the name of the class. So we did light. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do the opposite of the body. So I'll do background, color, white, and then I'll do color on that text number. And then we save that. And then now, if we go back here, it's flipped. Okay. So we are reusing the same class. Now, I could reuse the class on, we've used it on sections, but I can use it on different elements too. Like if I wanted to just use it on this paragraph, I could do that. All I'd have to do is go to that paragraph that I wanted to target, and then inside of the opening tag, I just put the class name. And then we have it. Okay, so that is how you use a class. ID works the exact same way. In the opening tag, I would just write the ID, set it equal to something, I'll call it EDU. And then in my CFS, I'll have hashtag EDU. And then let's say I wanted to do, what can we do? Let's just change the color here. Let's do it black. And then if we save that, we see that it just changed it. Okay. All right, so before I jump into the display property, are there any questions on classes, IDs, selectors, CFS in general, anything we've covered so far?
Can you go back one slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the way you did the ID thing kind of confused me a little bit. The very last thing you did there, like I got most of it, but I wasn't 100% how you did that ID. So, okay, that's what it was, the hashtag. Mm-hmm. So you just like threw out there EDU and then said hashtag EDU, and I'm just curious why.
So here I've created the ID EDU here. So it works the same way. Is there a
reason why you're saying EDU, or could it be like XYZ?
I did EDU because it's just educational background. That's why I chose EDU. That way I knew where it was. But you can make it equal to anything.
So the hashtag had to go before EDU, but it didn't have to go before light or the other one.
No, light is a period. So if it's a class, you put a period and then the class name. And then for ID, it's the hashtag and then the ID.
That's exactly what I needed. I missed that line somewhere. Thanks.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions?
Nope.
All right, we'll keep on going then. Oops. So then we have the display property. A display property has a number of values that I can have. The most common ones are going to be block, inline, and none. Block makes the element a block and won't let anything sit next to it on the page. So let's say you have two images side by side. If you do image display block, it will move the second image down to the second line because it won't allow anything to sit next to it. So on the same row. Inline allows the element to sit on the same line as the other element, but without formatting it as a block. And display none makes everything disappear. So if we are looking at the images, for example, let's say I do two of these absolute URLs because the other image was too big. We have those here. And if I do image display block, they will sit on separate lines. So we can see that here. They're on two separate lines. If I do inline, they will sit next to each other. And if I do none, they will disappear. Okay, so that is your display. And notice that my icon disappeared too because it's targeting all images. Okay, so I'll just leave that as inline. Save that. So that is the display property there. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is the CSS box model. So the CSS box model is going to be your best friend when you're playing around with CSS. CSS is a lot of trial and error. There are going to be times where you think it's going to go in one spot, but it doesn't go there. And then it's not, everything's not shifting right. Something's all the way over here when it's supposed to be in the middle of the page. And there's going to be a lot of trial and error. So one of the things that you want to take into consideration when you're doing the CSS box model is its height and width, which is going to be the actual content area. Then you have your padding, which is outside of that. So you can target the different top, right, bottom, left if you want to be specific, if you want them all to be different. Or you can just target padding to be equal altogether. Outside of that is going to be border, which works the same way, and then margin, which works the same way. So one thing I want to point out here is that when we are looking here, you can hit inspect, and then you have your styles here, and you have the box model here. So it's right there for you. So let's say I select this image, right? It tells me in the box model the exact pixels that I'm doing here. So the actual content is 460 by 460. I don't have any padding or border or margin, so nothing appears there. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of that. So let's say I'll do a padding of 5 pixels. Let's do a margin 20 pixels. This could be a lot. Let's do 10 pixels. Save that. And then we refresh that. It adjusts. And here, now if I select it, we have, and it color codes here. So 460 by 460, that's the content. Padding is green, and you can see on the screen that it's green as well. There's no border, so we can highlight, and then there's a margin, which is orange. So you can see there what's going on and how things are affecting other things. So you can also, in the style here, you can uncheck stuff to see what it would look like. This is the code that I had written. But let's say I don't like 10 pixels. Let's say I want to try 20 pixels. You can see in real time what that's going to do. So instead of writing in your code, saving it, refreshing your page, like, I don't like that, writing it again, saving it, refreshing, it's still not what I want. You can use your inspection tools, work it out there first, and then once you've come to something that you like, you can go ahead and change your actual code, because this isn't going to change your code. It just allows you to debug and play around. All right, so that is all I have for you on HTML and CSS. I want to thank you for coming here today. If you have any questions, feel free to Slack me at any time at cassandra.matos. I also have office hours today. And this is your chance to ask any last minute questions that you have before I close the lecture.
Is this lecture going to be recorded so we can watch it again, or are they all live?
They are all live, but I also do record them. So by the end of today, it will be posted in the announcement. So in that same area where you click to join the lecture, it will be replaced with a link to a YouTube video.
Okay, on our school-specific website, you mean?
Yeah, where you sign in to access the curriculum.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
As far as adding you on Slack, it's been a while since I've used Slack. How do I add you on there?
So are you in the Coder Camps Troops Slack already? Are you set up in there?
I am. I guess I was looking to see your name under my direct messages or something like that, or add you so I could message you if I needed to.
So you can just search for me in the search bar. Just put Cassandra. I should pop up, and then you can send me a direct message.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, it's been a while since I've used Slack, so getting back into the group.
Yeah,
right.
the
Great.
messaging me on Slack is the most effective way to contact.
Great.
Cassandra, I saw that you had to contact you to Slack you on the website, but it didn't have your email address. And I haven't heard from my mentor yet from Coder Camps, so
Okay.
I haven't been added to the Slack group. Is
Okay.
there any way you could put your email address on there as well, just so I can?
Yeah, I can put my email under the announcements.
Yeah, that'd be great.
What's your full name?
Russell. Last name's Ackard, Akard.
Okay. I'll figure out. You haven't heard anything from a mentor yet, correct?
Nothing at all.
Okay. So I'll contact the mentors team, see what's going on there, make sure someone reaches out to you. In the meantime, I'll put my email address on under the announcements, okay?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
I think that's all I've got.
All right.
All
Well, thank
set.
you guys so much for coming in to lecture today. If you have the time or if you want, go ahead and join me for office hours later, and I will see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Have a great one.